Oh Japan, the land of sakura, anime girls, and video games. Now, Japan is probably the most important country for the gaming industry, only rivaled by the US by the amount of games released and by the legacy in the gaming industry. But I would argue that lately Japan is prevailing over the US in quality of the games released. So today we're gonna discuss the input, influence, and the legacy of Japan in the gaming industry. But first of all, Japan heavily relies on entertainment products in general. In particular, the whole world is watching anime, so it is no wonder that Japan is also very strong in the gaming industry. Because in gaming, as in anime for example, you need writing, art design, world building, and in general a lot of creativity. Japan always had it. So again, it is no wonder that they are doing that great in the gaming industry. But Japan is not only producing games, but it is also a huge hardware producer. I mean, PlayStation is an obvious example that comes to mind, but also Nintendo Switch, gaming dance pads, VR hardware, and a lot of less renowned consoles. We will not talk about it, this video is games centered, but I think it is important to know that Japan not only produces games, but also is a gaming manufacturing powerhouse. Now, with that out of the way, we can begin, and let's begin with the big fish. And to warm up, let's begin with Capcom. It is a publisher, but it is also a game developer. There's actually a good lesson to learn while studying the history of Capcom, but about that a little later. Now, as many old game companies, Capcom started as a manufacturer of arcade machines. Their first game was a 1984 game Volgos. In 1987, they released the first game of one of their most successful IPs, Street Fighter. The last Street Fighter game was released in 2023, that is Street Fighter 6. The game has 86% positive reviews on Steam. The series is quite popular and has iconic characters. In the same year, that is 1987, yet another successful IP was released, Mega Man. Maybe not the most popular nowadays, but it was quite popular back in the days and it had many sequels. In 1996, the first Resident Evil game came out, and it became one of the most beloved series of Capcom and in general in gaming. The first Resident Evil game was a proper game. It had proper plot, lore, third-person fixated camera, good graphics for its time, it had Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield, it had puzzles. It was a proper, almost modern game with the limitation of the technology of that time. Overall, it was nothing but a huge success. In 2 years, they released Resident Evil 2, which again became a banger. Again, you had two characters to choose from as the protagonist, that being Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield. But now the storylines of the protagonists is more different from each other than in the original game, making it basically two games in one. Claire gets the Sherry storyline and Leon gets the Ada Wong storyline. Again, nothing but the perfection of a game. In 1999, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was released. It had a lot of reusable content from RE2, but overall a good game. In 2001, a niche but interesting game came out, Gyakuten Seiban, also known as Ace Attorney. Basically, you play as a lawyer and defend your clients. You probably didn't play it, but you definitely have seen the memes. In 2002, the first game of one of my favorite game series of all times was released, that is Devil May Cry 1. Originally, it was supposed to be a sequel to the Resident Evil series, but luckily Capcom saw the potential in the game and decided to make it a separate game series. Even today though, I can feel the connection between the series even in the latest games in the series. For example, in the transitions between gameplay and cutscenes, in the direction and staging of the cutscenes. Isn't it cool how the connection is still there, even after 25 years? Now, the first Devil May Cry didn't have much to offer in terms of narrative compared to other DMC games, but it set in the overall lore and established the characters, also defined the gameplay of the series. 2 years later, in 2003, Devil May Cry 2 was released. Well, it was indeed released. I don't have nice words to say about the game. Among the fans of Devil May Cry games, we like to pretend it never existed. So yeah. But in 2005, Devil May Cry 3 was released, and I think it is the best game in the series, and a lot of people would agree. At least it is the best story in the series. Also, it is chronologically the first game in the series. Aside from Dante, we get 3 new characters, and actually the game has, aside from bosses, only 4 characters. But with only 4 of them, the game creates a very cool plot. Here, for the first time, we get to meet Lady, also known as Mary. Also, for the first time, we actually get a proper Virgil character. He is the storm that is approaching, and also the most motivated man in the series. Virgil technically was present in Devil May Cry 1, but you hardly can call him a character there. In DMC 3, we finally get a proper Virgil. He is an antagonist of the game, which is cool because he is Dante's twin, and who can be a better antagonist to you than yourself? Now, in the end, the game features a great story, charismatic characters, fantastic cinematics, cool combat and boss fights. Can't wait for the remake. Now let's move on. In the same year, that is 2005, Resident Evil 4 was released, which for many gamers became the most favorite game in the series, featuring the continuation of the story of Leon Kennedy. This time around, the game is bigger and more diverse than its predecessors. You have a lot of different locations and a lot of bosses. In 2006, Capcom released the first Dead Rising game, which became a huge banger, with a rating on Steam 89% positive reviews. Then we got Dead Rising 2, 3 and 4, with the quality of the games going down each game. And finally, in 2008, Devil May Cry 4 was released. It had its issues, but in general it was a good game. It was my first DMC game. I've played it like 50 times. But we won't go much into details to not make the video too long, because I can talk about Devil May Cry games for hours. Now, with Devil May Cry 4 ends the era of great Capcom games. In late 2000s, early 10s, here comes the dark age of Capcom. We had a terrible Street Fighter 4 in 2008, a mid-co-op Resident Evil 5 in 2009 with bad AI. Later in 2012, we got again a mid-co-op Resident Evil 6. Also, Capcom gave Ninja Theory to reboot Devil May Cry series, and we got the 2013 DMC reboot that was an abomination of a game. In the same period of time, Dead Rising games keep getting worse and worse. In general, that period of time was a generational fumble for Capcom. The only good game of that time period is the first Dragon's Dogma. I think all Western developers, and especially developers like BioWare, Ubisoft, Activision, Bethesda, have things to learn from Capcom. In the midst of this generational fumble, Capcom didn't gaslight people that actually their games are good, and it is the gamers who are stupid. No, they didn't blame their customers. They listened to what gamers have to say and started making good games again. They were like, gamers didn't like co-op shooter Resident Evil. Maybe we should make Resident Evil games to be survival horrors again. And they created Resident Evil 7. Gamers loved it. Then they were like, gamers didn't like DMC reboot. And they just cancelled all the reboot stuff that was brought by the 2013 DMC. They just made it uncanon and continued with the series from where Devil May Cry 4 left off. They released Devil May Cry 5, which was a great success, with even more combat variety than its predecessors. Then they released Monster Hunter World, that was a huge success. They elevated the series with this game. Previously, Monster Hunter games were generally made for portative consoles. Then they were like, gamers loved previous Resident Evil games, let's remake them. And gamers loved it. In general, they continued the existing franchises, starting new ones, remaking the old ones. Just in the near future, we expect Resident Evil Requiem, Pragmata, Onimusha The Way of the Sword. I personally hope for Devil May Cry remakes. In short, they are thriving. Capcom proves that even if you fumbled, even if you are having a bad phase, you can just create good games again by delivering what gamers want. It is not rocket science, it is that easy. And I wish more Western developers would see Capcom as an example. Now that we have finished this section, since we were talking about Japan, Capcom and Resident Evil games, while we rest a bit, let me bring up a little detail that I noticed while making this video. Japanese games, unlike anime for example, are not Japanese-centered. A lot of anime takes place in Japan, a lot of characters are Japanese. I wanted to place on the thumbnail a hot Japanese character, but I wasn't able to find one. At least not a very popular one, so I ended up putting Ada Wong. She's in a Japanese game, but she's Chinese herself. So yeah, just a small detail to share. Now that we have finished this Capcom section, if you're still here and listening, then subscribe to the channel, you obviously like it. Also leave a like of course for your favorite croissant. Also, this video is actually a series. I've already did a similar video about France, so check it out later. And I plan to do videos about the US and Eastern Europe at least, and then maybe about even more countries. Now, and let's continue with Bandai Namco. They are both developers and publishers. So is Capcom, for example, but Bandai Namco is more of a publisher than, for example, Capcom. They have published a lot of FromSoftware games, for example. About FromSoftware we will talk a little later. It is too important not to have a separate section about FromSoftware. Also, Bandai Namco published games like Little Nightmares, Dragon Ball Z games and Naruto games, all quite popular games. Now, Bandai Namco also developed some cool games. First of all, Tekken series, a very popular fighting franchise. Though Tekken 8, the last game in the series, doesn't have very good reviews. Soul Calibur Games is yet another fighting series from Bandai Namco. It is less popular than Tekken, but it has its fair share of fans. Also, Bandai Namco is the father of a very popular classic franchise, that is Pac-Man. I don't think I need to tell more about it, it is self-explanatory. Another Bandai Namco game series is Tales of. It is like their little anime Final Fantasy series that is mostly popular in Japan. Yet another anime action Bandai Namco game that was quite well received is 2021 Scarlet Nexus that I have actually played. It isn't mind-blowing, but it was quite nice. An unexpected franchise that Bandai Namco develops is Ace Combat. It is a military jet simulator. Surprisingly for me, it is quite popular and beloved series. And the last series that we're gonna discuss in terms of Bandai Namco is Code Vein games, which there are only 2 of those. It is basically an anime Souls-like. The first game was very well received. People liked the visuals, the story and gameplay. But the sequel that was released recently got a lot of hate. People complain about bad performance, massive censorship, and a bad story that has nothing to do with the original game, even though the original ending had potential for a true sequel. Now, since we're talking about Bandai Namco, it is only fair to also talk about FromSoftware, because Bandai Namco was a publisher for many FromSoftware games. Not all, but many. FromSoftware is a huge company, not by the amount of developers, games developed, money or any of that. I'm talking about the influence. FromSoftware is the father of Souls-like genre. It is a genre of action hardcore games that feature a lot of challenging boss fights. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because FromSoftware at the beginning of its history and FromSoftware of today are very different companies. For a huge amount of time, the company was just in search for identity. Games that they were creating were very different. We had dark fantasy RPGs like Kingsfield, mecha games like Armored Core, horror games like Echo Knight, and even, allegedly, a Hello Kitty game. But everything changed when in 2004 a man who loves feet entered the FromSoftware building. That person being Hidetaka Miyazaki. At first he worked on Armored Core games, later he was entrusted to be a designer of an Armored Core game. But one day he found out about a project of FromSoftware that everyone deemed to be an inevitable failure. The project later came to be known as Demon Souls. He insisted to lead that project, and since everybody thought it would be a failure, he got the full creative freedom to do as he pleases. And that's how FromSoftware finally developed its identity. For the first time, the world got to experience a Souls game, a game that established a whole new genre. Hardcore boss fights, grim dark fantasy, barefoot maidens and poisonous swamps. And to say that it was a success would be an understatement. I mean, the whole genre is named after that game. How can it not be a success? And then Dark Souls 1 came out. After that, Dark Souls 2, which was initially hated. But now everyone suddenly loves it? Or is it a joke? I honestly don't know. Then the legendary Bloodborne came out, and almost immediately Dark Souls 3, which was a huge banger. That was my first Souls game actually. Then in 2019 Sekiro came out, which was also a hardcore game, but it was actually a lot different from other Souls games. By the way, check out my Sekiro After 6 Years video and subscribe if you're listening to it. You'd definitely like it if you do. Now, Sekiro won the Game of the Year in 2019, and in 2022 Elden Ring came out, which was massive, both in significance and influence, as well as in actual scale of the game. An actual open world, just a ton of bosses, a ton of weapons with unique mechanics, almost infinite building capabilities, even crazier lore than in previous games, with George R.R. Martin helping with the lore writing. Then the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC came out for Elden Ring, which made already a big game just massive. In 2022, Elden Ring won the second Game of the Year for FromSoftware. After that we got Elden Ring Night Train, which maybe will not become #1 FromSoftware game, but it certainly found its audience. In short, FromSoftware is at the peak, and they don't seem to be slowing down. Now, aside from Souls games, the other game series that is actually surprisingly alive is Armored Core series, with the latest game that came out in 2023, and actually people loved it. It has 93% positive reviews on Steam. That's one of the highest ratings that I've ever seen, so the series is alive and kicking. By the way, now Miyazaki is the representative director of FromSoftware. That's what making good games does to you. And now let's talk about Nintendo. It releases primarily family-friendly games, but it doesn't mean that they're not highly regarded. On the contrary, Nintendo has a lot of fans. Nintendo games are highly focused on gameplay first, rather than on the narrative, and some people like it that way. It is hard to even describe how massive Nintendo is. You may even never have played their games or owned their console, but you know them very well. Some of the most popular franchises in the world are associated with Nintendo. First of all, Mario games. Since 1985, Nintendo has been releasing countless high-quality Mario games. They are primarily focused on gameplay. We have racing Mario games, tennis Mario games, golf games, platformer puzzle games. Like, there's a countless amount of them. Another very important game series for Nintendo are Zelda games, especially The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It is an icon of game mechanics. As with Mario, Zelda has countless games. It is a very loved series, and for a reason. Two more game series that are worth mentioning are Animal Crossing, a very popular social and life simulator, and the second one is Metroid series, the games that invented the Metroid genre. As you might guess, it is a very influential game series if it invented a whole genre. And finally, let's talk about Pokémons. Nintendo didn't develop the first Pokémon game, but they did publish it. And they're also a co-owner of the IP rights. Actually, for your information, Pokémon series were games first. Only after the first Pokémon game was released, a Pokémon manga and Pokémon anime came out. I don't think I need to explain what Pokémons are. Like, everyone knows what Pokémons are, even if you have never interacted with Pokémon games or anime. Like, everyone knows Pikachu at least. Now, as I said, Pokémon games came out first, and it was 1996 game Pocket Monsters Red and Green. Yes, Pokémon is short for Pocket Monsters, but I digress. Pokémon is one of the most expensive IPs on the planet, but as I said, Nintendo is actually a publisher of the series. Almost all Pokémon games were developed by the company Game Freak. There is not much to tell about them, because almost all they do is release Pokémon games. However, there is an interesting project from them on the horizon. That is Beast of Reincarnation. Square Enix. Square Enix is a weird company, because how can you have so many cool IPs and be a financially struggling company? Like, the management of Square Enix is totally at fault. Because before researching, I thought they released and published many bad games, and that's why they're broke. But when I actually tried to remember massive Square Enix flops, not many games came to mind. Yes, we had a couple, like for example Forspoken, Foam Star Shooter, Babylon's Fall. Like, they're all bad flops. But there are a lot of companies that flopped more and still are not in that much trouble, so it must be something else. And the answer is bad management. But before I explain about it further, let's look at successful Square Enix games, so you would better understand how hard it is to mismanage a company like Square Enix. But the Square Enix management works really hard to F up their company, so don't underestimate them. Now, first of all, the Final Fantasy series. Just in case you didn't know, almost every Final Fantasy game is a separate universe. There's almost none actual similarities between the games, besides Chocobo and the Gods. Now, even so, the series is quite confusing. There are so many games, remakes, Part 2 games, Part 3 games, etc. Even so, the series is extremely popular, especially Final Fantasy VII. So not long ago, Square Enix decided to remake the game, which was a good decision, but the greed took over and they split the game in 2 parts. So even though the first Final Fantasy VII remake was a success, the sequel was a financial disaster, because the original game was a 35 hours long game, and they made both remakes 35 hours each, so that they could sell the game twice. People didn't like it. However, the issue is not only with the games themselves, but it is also the lack of advertisement. Like, nobody was talking about FF7 Rebirth. Yes, often popular games don't really need advertisements, because the YouTubers do the job for the publishers. But the hype train already left with the first part, and Square Enix did nothing to advertise the game. I mean, FF7 Rebirth was released in 2024, when there were almost no games that year, and still they didn't sell enough of the game. The same with FF16. It did not have a massive fan base as the FF7, and still there was no effort from Square Enix to hype the game. Yes, having a Final Fantasy name is a cool feat, but when every game is basically a new IP with a new world and new characters, it doesn't help much. Aside from Final Fantasy, Square Enix develops Kingdom Hearts and Dragon Quest, but it is not that interesting. Those are not very massive. But it is far more interesting to look at the games Square Enix publishes, and games Square Enix has rights to intellectual property. And Square Enix has a lot of them. Or should I say, had a lot of them. They sold some in 2022. They sold Tomb Raider, Deus Ex and some less renowned IPs. But before they sold them, what did they do with them? How well were this series doing? Not very well. Again, I think for Tomb Raider, Square Enix didn't bother to advertise it. And Deus Ex, they literally did nothing with the series for years, even though the Deus Ex games were cool. Just Cause series. How many years has it been since we had a Just Cause game? It has been 8 years, and Just Cause 5 reportedly is cancelled. Nier series, meaning Nier Automata, Nier Replicant and the original Drakengard games. You know, fans asked Yoko Taro, the director and writer of the Drakengard series and Nier series, why doesn't he do anything? And he said that he worked on many games, but they keep getting cancelled. Yes, Square Enix just doesn't greenlight Nier games, even though Nier Automata sold over 9 million copies. You can't say that Square Enix doesn't do everything in their power to screw the company. They have all the cards, but they just don't play them. It is like if you would have 4 of a kind, would fold your hand and then would wonder, why can't you win in poker? If you don't advertise your games, if you invest in your projects and then cancel them before the release, if you don't release your popular IPs, of course you would be broke. And yes, the creator of the universe can't do anything with it, because Square Enix holds the IP rights to the Nier series. Life is Strange series is also held by Square Enix, even though it was developed by Dontnod. In this case, I won't complain, because in this case Square Enix does something with the series, and it is a good thing that Dontnod doesn't develop Liz games. They prove they can't by releasing Liz 2. But anyway, I want to point out how bad Square Enix is as a publisher. Having them as a publisher is like signing a deal with the devil. They will take everything from you and you will be the one who is screwed. There are certainly other game publishers who are screwing their developers, like for example Sony, but Square Enix is probably the worst among them. By the way, don't worry, I didn't forget about Sony. I wanna close the video with Sony, because there is one message that I think it is good for the end of the video, and it naturally comes out of the Sony discussion. Now, since we have mentioned Nier games, it is only fair to talk about Platinum Games, because even though Square Enix holds the rights to the Nier IP, Platinum Games were the ones who developed Nier Automata. That's the only Nier game developed by Platinum Games. Square Enix though just hands over side hustles. Now, aside from Nier Automata, Platinum Games developed all Bayonetta games. Fun fact, Bayonetta is actually developed by the creators of Devil May Cry 1, which isn't surprising because both games are slashers. However, I personally prefer Devil May Cry gameplay. Now, another popular game that Platinum Games co-developed is Ninja Gaiden 4. The fans loved it. Now, aside from less popular games, Platinum Games developed Metal Gear Rising, one of the most popular games in the Metal Gear series, which introduced a revolutionary cutting mechanic, like literally you can almost cut anything in the game. Also, the game has a self-sufficient plot that allows the gamers to easily understand the game without actually playing all the previous Metal Gear games. And overall, gamers loved the game. Now, and since we're talking about Metal Gear Rising, it is only natural to talk about Konami, which holds the IP to Metal Gear series. First of all, Metal Gear games are an old game series, with the first game that came out in 1987. Since then, Konami released a lot of Metal Gear games, and it is hard to keep track of them. The only issue with Metal Gear games is that majority of them are old, and it is hard to get in the series. I personally tried to play Phantom Pain, and I was just confused. I didn't know what is going on and what to do. And no, I'm not blaming the game. I'm just saying that you need context, and to get context you need to play those old games. Now Konami is remaking the old Metal Gear games, and I have played Snake Eater, and it's a pretty cool game, waiting for more. And don't worry, we'll talk about Kojima a little later. Now, aside from Metal Gear games, there's one more series that I like from Konami, that is Castlevania, for example. You play as a vampire. And after playing Vampire Masquerade's Bloodlines 2, I really came to appreciate Castlevania games. There you really feel like a vampire. But let's move on, and let's talk about Silent Hill, because Konami is the IP holder of Silent Hill, a very popular horror franchise. They developed the original Silent Hill games that became classics, and now they outsourced Silent Hill 2 Remake and the new Silent Hill F. Silent Hill F I think came out to be a very cool and atmospheric game. By the way, the actual developer of Silent Hill F is the company Neobards. They made a couple remasters, but their best work is Silent Hill F. Now, Silent Hill aside, Konami also developed a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh games. I know there are a lot of people who love Yu-Gi-Oh. Also, Konami developed and published some football games. Now, and let's go back a little and finish the discussion about Metal Gear. Since its origins, the Metal Gear games were designed and written by Hideo Kojima. In 2015, Hideo Kojima left Konami. Konami holds the IP rights to Metal Gear games, and they have a lot of games to remake. But how will be the quality of the future Metal Gear games, we don't know. But it seems that without Hideo Kojima it is not very bright. Now, and of course Kojima didn't retire after he left Konami. He created an independent studio that is Kojima Productions, and to this day he already released 2 Death Stranding games. They have a quite bizarre gameplay, but the story is actually quite good. Now, and let's talk about SEGA. First of all, Yakuza games, or how they call them nowadays, the Like a Dragon series. In those games you usually play as a member of Yakuza, that is basically Japanese mafia. And you may have seen some scenes on the internet from Yakuza series that are weird. But that aside, Yakuza games are very highly regarded. Especially the last games in the series, and especially Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. It has 96% positive reviews on Steam. That's just an insane score. Aside from Yakuza, Sega also develops and publishes Sonic games. They are the father of Sonic. They developed the first Sonic game, and even though I personally never played a Sonic game, a lot of people did, and for many Sonic is their childhood game. Now let me quickly point out games that Sega published. First of all, as a publisher, Sega published a lot of Total War games, including the Warhammer trilogy. Also they published Alien Isolation and 2 Demon Slayer games. And with that out of the way, let's finish this section by discussing the company ATLUS, that since 2013 is acquired by Sega. Now it is their subsidiary company. It is best known as the developer of Persona games. Even if you have never played them, you know about them. I personally remember Persona games as my school days. I remember how the characters in the game would pew-pew in their head to summon their persona. Now, jokes aside, although it wasn't a joke, it is literally in the game, Persona games are a very popular turn-based series. Also, people really like the narrative of the games. The same goes for Metaphor ReFantazio. Although it is a separate game universe, it is quite similar to Persona games. And the same goes for the Shin Megami Tensei series, that although is not as popular as ReFantazio and Persona, are very loved by the fans of ATLUS. By the way, fun fact, apparently Persona started as a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei. Now we will speed up for smaller studios, and then we will talk about Sony. Studio Koei Tecmo, and we will also talk about Team Ninja. because they often work together, Team Ninja as a developer and Koei Tecmo as the IP holder and publisher. The most popular game series of Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja is the Neo series. They are Japanese samurai-themed hardcore action games, or you can describe them as Souls-like games. The recent Neo 3 people liked a lot. The second series of Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja is a popular fighting game series with jiggle physics, that is Dead or Alive series. And the series that I mentioned earlier, Ninja Gaiden. Earlier I mentioned that Platinum Games co-developed Ninja Gaiden 4, but usually Ninja Gaiden games are developed by Team Ninja, and Koei Tecmo is the IP holder and usually is the publisher. Tango Gamework, known for Evil Within Horrors, Ghostwire Tokyo and Hi-Fi Rush. Cygames Studio, developer of many games but best known for the legendary Uma Masumi Pretty Derby, a game about racing horse girls that had no business being that good. There are even more small developers: Level 5, Spike Crunchsoft, Arc System Works, Vanillaware, Grasshopper Manufacturer, and probably many more that I forgot about. And finally Sony. And Sony, it is not just about games, but Sony is everything. Movies, music, cameras, and many more things, but we're interested in games. And probably Sony is the biggest company in gaming nowadays. Now, it is actually hard to call Sony gaming branch as an entirely Japanese company. It was created by the Japanese main Sony company, and it was based in Japan. But almost immediately, the global headquarters of Sony gaming branch was established in the US. Up to 2012, the company was run by Japanese CEOs. But since 2012, things have changed, and again it is hard to call the company Japanese. Now, that aside, Sony doesn't really develop games. They have internal studios that develop games for them. But it is not like the internal studios of Ubisoft, for example, where Ubisoft created those studios. PlayStation often either acquires them completely or just signing exclusive deals with already existing studios. Now, even so, the influence of Sony in the gaming industry is still tremendous. They're using their PlayStation console and their money as leverage to found and create games that they want to gain market influence. Again, even though Sony themselves don't particularly develop anything, they're still the reason we got many iconic games. Those being Uncharted games, The Last of Us games, Bloodborne, Horizon games, Ghost of series, God of War games, and so on. I don't think I need to continue because you probably know Sony games yourself. Though there are two small Sony studios that are Japanese. Those are Team Asobi, Astrobot developer, Polyphony Digital, Gran Turismo series. So in the end, I think the gaming industry owes a lot to Sony. This half Japanese, half American company did bring us a lot of games. Now that's about history. Today though, I think that the quality of Sony products are declining, and it is because they won the console war. With the competition out of the way, they relax and stop caring about the customers. Sony games get more and more controversial. You can see it with The Last of Us 2, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, and Ghost of Yotei. The sequels of very popular franchises cannot repeat the success of its predecessors. And not only that, but Sony invests in very weird projects, such as for example Concord. Many people didn't pay attention that it was Sony who financed the development of Concord, a game that burned through $400 million just to die in a month. Sony could have financed 4 good games with those money. But no. And now a similar event is on the horizon. Literally, Sony is financing a new weird Horizon multiplayer game that literally nobody asked for, and it will die in a month. And it is sad to see because Sony, as well as many Japanese game developers, saved the gaming industry in mid-2010s and from there on. While the whole Western development was chasing the hype train of online shooters, battle royales and then hero shooters. It was primarily Japanese studios who delivered good games to us. Just remember how many games died trying to recreate the success of PUBG, and then how many games died trying to reinvent hero shooters. And with Concord, Highguard, and the new Horizon game, we see that this fever is still strong and it now affects Sony as well. Now, since mid-10s, we had Japanese game developers who saved the gaming industry. We had Resident Evil games, we had Devil May Cry 5, we had Final Fantasy 15 that is very underrated, we had a lot of Souls games from FROMSOFTWARE and from other game developers. We had Sony on our side, which delivered many excellent games. But that's the beauty of the gaming industry, I think. When one falls, the industry continues. Even if now Sony is starting to fall, we still will have good games coming out. Not long ago we've made a video that is called 2025 the best year of gaming. Even though many renowned studios and popular franchises flop, someone else picks up the torch and carry it over in the future. Thus gamers always have good games to play. So play good games, don't support slop, even if it is of the franchise you loved. And maybe one day they will come around, like Capcom did. And that's it for today, thank you for being with me. And if you want to support me, consider subscribing and leaving a like. Also, if you have gamer friends, it would also help to share the video. I appreciate your support. And of course, check out my other videos on the channel. I have plenty interesting videos already. You can check out the video about France. Also, I have a lot of tops, analytics, critiques and so on. For example, a video game discussion on whether games are art. Or a video analysis of companions in video games, and much more. And see you in my other videos.